Welcome back, everybody, to the deep dive. Today we're looking at something pretty major. We're going to be diving into the potential reform or even the complete replacement of the World Health Organization.
Yeah, it is interesting. We're at a sort of crossroads right now. It's late 2024, and there's a possibility of a second Trump presidency on the horizon. And some groups are seeing this as an opportunity to really make some significant changes to global health policy.
You're right, and one of the loudest voices in this whole movement is Nigel Farage. Now, he's leading a group called Action on World Health, and they're pushing this idea hard that this is a once-in-a-generation chance to seize back control from the WHO.
Yeah, and this is fascinating because it really builds on what we saw back in 2020, right? When Trump accused the WHO of being under China's control and he halted U.S. funding. And now, even though the Biden administration reversed that decision, a potential Trump comeback has given Farage and his group, hope that they can really push this agenda forward.
Okay, so let's talk about Action on World Health for a minute. Now, they're not just calling for, like small changes. They want to either completely overhaul the WHO or replace it with something else entirely. What's the reasoning behind this?
Well, their argument comes down to this. They think the WHO has really drifted away from its core mission. And they point to things, like the Ebola crisis response and the
Ah,
debate about the origins of COVID-19 as evidence of this.
I see, yeah. And they also seem to be really focused on the idea that the WHO shouldn't be dictating health policies, but rather acting more as a guide,
Yeah.
right? They're very big on national sovereignty with countries making their own decisions.
Absolutely. And that actually leads us to something I thought was pretty curious when I was looking into the WHO's funding structure. You might expect that a major country would be the top funder, and you'd be right. It's Germany. But the second largest contributor is actually the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, a private entity.
Whoa. That does make you wonder, what kind of influence does a private foundation like that have over an organization like the WHO? It raises questions about how these global health decisions are made
Right.
and who has the final say, right?
For sure, for sure. And this idea of who's really calling the shots, it becomes even more relevant when you consider the 2025 pandemic treaty. It's expected to be finalized in May 2025, and there is this concern that it could become legally binding for all 194 member states of the WHO.
Wait, legally binding. So, like, potentially countries would have to follow whatever health policies the WHO decided, even if those policies contradict what their own government or their own people want.
Yeah, that's the fear. And it ties into this broader debate about global governance and how much power international organizations should really have over national decisions. It brings up questions about how we balance the need for global cooperation on things like pandemics, right? But also the right of individual countries to determine their own policies.
Right. That's a really big question with no easy answers. Almost like we're walking a tightrope trying to find that balance between global action and, individual nation sovereignty.
Absolutely. And it's not just Farage and his group raising these concerns either. There's also Dr. David Bell, a former WHO medical officer, and he's leading a review of the organization. Now, what's interesting about his approach is that he's put together a team that includes not just medical experts, but legal and ethical minds as well.
Oh, so it sounds like they're really trying to take a comprehensive look at the WHO, examining it from all angles. What's the point of this review? What are they hoping to achieve?
Well, they're focusing on two key areas. First, they're looking at the power structure inside the WHO, how are decisions being made and who really holds the most influence. And then, based on their findings, they'll recommend either significant reforms to the way the WHO operates or, and this is a big or, if they think it's necessary, a complete replacement of the WHO with a new international health body.
Wow. Okay. So they're not ruling anything out. Sounds like they're prepared to consider some major changes. What about Dr. Bell himself? What's his take on all of this?
Well, he's in a very interesting position. He's openly expressed concerns about the way the WHO has been going, stating that he is increasingly concerned with the departure of the WHO from its roots. But at the same time, he's made it clear that he still cares deeply about international health cooperation.
I see. It sounds like he's really wrestling with this tension between, the need for change and his belief in the importance of global collaboration on health.
Exactly. And he's laid out some specific goals for what he hopes this review will achieve. He wants to see a restoration of national ownership when it comes to health policies, a clear commitment to protecting bodily autonomy, getting rid of conflicts of interest within the WHO, and the establishment of strong, transparent governance.
Those are some pretty ambitious goals. But what if the WHO just isn't willing to accept those reforms?
Well, Dr. Bell has been pretty clear about that, too. He believes that if the WHO can't be reformed to address these concerns, then maybe it is time to start fresh with a body more fit for purpose and reflecting the will of the world's people.
So it really seems like we're at a crucial point. We've got Farage's group pushing for major changes, a pandemic treaty that could shift even more power towards the WHO, and a former WHO insider leading a review that could result in either reform or a complete replacement of the entire organization.
And it all raises some important questions for all of us, right? Is the WHO even reformable, or do we need a brand new approach to global health governance? What would a new international health body even look like? How should it balance the needs of individual nations with the need for global cooperation?
It's definitely a lot to think about. And I'm curious what stands out to you the most as we dive deeper into this.
What really strikes me is that we're not just talking about abstract ideas here. These decisions about global health policy, they have very real consequences for people all over the planet. They impact how governments respond to pandemics, what kind of health care is available, and even individual choices about our own health.
That's such a good point. This isn't just about institutions and treaties. It's about things that directly affect people's lives.
Absolutely. And I think it's really important that we as individuals engage in this conversation. We need to understand what's at stake, think critically about the different perspectives, and make our voices heard.
I completely agree. This isn't just something for politicians and experts to debate. It's about our collective future, and we all have a role to play in shaping it.
It's easy to get lost in the big picture stuff when we talk about balancing global and national interests, but we're really talking about policies that impact people's everyday lives.
Right. It's more than just abstract ideas. Things like lockdowns and travel restrictions, even vaccine mandates, things that affect people's freedoms and their choices.
Exactly. And that's where things get kind of heated. You have some people who really believe we need like a powerful global health authority to deal with pandemics effectively and other health threats that cross borders. They say it's the only way to make sure research is coordinated, that there are quick responses, and that we're unified in facing global health challenges.
Yeah, I can see the logic there. I mean, like, if a new virus pops up, wouldn't it be better to have everybody working together
Yeah,
instead of every country just doing their own thing?
right, right. That's their thinking. But on the other hand, there are some people who are really worried about giving too much power to one global group. They worry that unelected officials would end up making decisions that affect entire countries, potentially even overriding the decisions of governments that were elected democratically.
And it's not just national governments either, right? It comes down to individual rights and freedoms as well.
For sure. A lot of people are uncomfortable with the idea of a global organization telling them what they can and cannot do with their own bodies. Take vaccine mandates as an example. That gets really personal when you're talking about a global organization potentially having the power to enforce those policies.
Yeah, it seems like we're always trying to find that middle ground, a way to work together globally without having to give up individual freedoms or national sovereignty.
That is the question, isn't it? And there are no easy answers.
Yeah.
It requires, really listening to different opinions and having open and honest conversations, and then ultimately trying to find solutions that work for everybody involved.
It's a reminder that global governance in the 21st century is complicated. We have to face problems that just didn't exist a while ago, like pandemics and climate change and cybersecurity threats. All of those things require international collaboration. But then they raise these questions about power and sovereignty and individual rights.
Absolutely. And that's why it's so important to be critical and discerning when we approach these things. We should be wary of anybody who's pushing easy solutions or trying to use fear and uncertainty for their own benefit.
Yeah, it's easy to get caught up in the rhetoric, especially when we're talking about health and safety.
Mhm.
We have to think for ourselves, question what we hear, and demand evidence-based policies that respect our individual rights as well as the good of everyone.
I think these conversations are really important. We can't just sit back and let other people decide what our future looks like. We need to educate ourselves on these issues and make sure our voices are heard.
You're right. It's about taking an active role in shaping the world we want to live in.
Okay, let's switch gears a little bit and talk about another important piece of all of this: conflicts of interest.
That's a big one, especially when it comes to the WHO. Dr. Bell has been really vocal about the need for more transparency and accountability, when it comes to potential biases and financial ties within the organization. And it's interesting because we were talking earlier about the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation being the second largest funder of the WHO. And that itself raises questions about whether private interests might be influencing the WHO's priorities.
For sure. And it goes beyond private foundations too. We have to look at the influence of pharmaceutical companies and governments, any powerful group or actor who might stand to gain from shaping global health policies.
It's like this really tangled web of interconnected interest, but we have to ask those tough questions. Who benefits from certain policies? Who loses out? And are the people making these decisions really working in the best interests of everyone's health? Or are they serving some other agenda?
Well said. In the end, it's all about making sure that decisions are grounded in solid science and evidence, not on financial gain or political maneuvering. Transparency is key.
Hmm.
We need to know who's funding the WHO, who's sitting on their advisory boards, and what potential conflicts of interest there might be.
For me, it's all about trust. If people stop trusting global health organizations, then they lose their legitimacy and their power to do anything effective.
That's a great point. Trust is earned through transparency, accountability, and by proving that you're dedicated to doing what's best for the public good, and not just serving private interests.
Okay, so we've covered national sovereignty, individual liberties, conflicts of interest. But there's another important piece of all this: governance. What does good governance even look like when we talk about global health?
That's a tough one. And it's something that Dr. Bell and his team are working on as they review the WHO. They're looking at representation, like who actually gets to be part of the decision-making process, who has the power, and how do we ensure that those decisions represent the values and the goals of the global community?
It's like creating the rule book for global health decisions. Who has the authority? How can we make sure that everyone's voice is heard? How do we keep these organizations accountable?
Exactly. And it goes beyond just the WHO itself. We need to think about global health governance in general. How do all these different groups, like national governments, international organizations, NGOs, and private foundations, how do they work together? How do we build a system that's both effective and fair?
Right now, it feels kind of like a maze. It's not always clear who's in charge or how they make decisions. And that makes it hard for people to trust them and for those global health initiatives to work.
I agree. What we really need is a system that's transparent, accountable, and where people can participate. One where everyone has a voice and where decisions are made in a way that's equitable and just.
Makes sense.
Uh-huh.
But is that even possible? Can we really make global governance more democratic and transparent and accountable?
Well, it's a huge challenge. There's no doubt about that. It's going to take political will from a lot of different countries and a real commitment to working together and a willingness to try new and innovative things.
We need to get away from these top-down control models and move towards something more collaborative, where everybody can participate.
Right. A system that understands how interconnected our world is and how important it is that we all work together to solve these problems.
It goes back to finding that balance, right? Between the power of individual nations and international cooperation, between the rights of individuals and the good of everybody. How do we build a system that takes all of that into account?
And how can we be sure that global health policies are truly based on science and solid evidence, driven by a real concern for people's well-being, and not just politics or hidden agendas?
Those are the questions we need to be asking. If we want a healthier and more just world, we have to aim high and keep working for that progress.
I think you're absolutely right. And informed citizens, like the people listening to us who are willing to engage in these tough conversations, they're the key.
For sure. It's about looking past the headlines and the sound bites and really wrestling with these issues. It's about asking the hard questions, demanding evidence, and holding our leaders accountable. It feels like we've just scratched the surface here. There's so much more to talk about when it comes to the future of global health.
Yeah, it's a huge topic, and I think that's why it's so interesting and important. We're dealing with really big questions here, like power and governance, individual rights, and our responsibility to each other.
And speaking of responsibility, we can't forget about the role of technology in all of this. It's changing healthcare so much, and it's having a big impact on global health as well.
Right. We're seeing amazing advances in telemedicine and artificial intelligence and big data. All these things are really changing how we track and diagnose and treat diseases and even prevent them on a global scale.
It's almost like we're entering a new era of global health. But of course, like any new technology, there are always some downsides. We need to be careful about the ethical side of things.
Absolutely. We can't just embrace new technology without thinking about the consequences. Data privacy, bias in algorithms, the possibility of making existing inequalities worse. Those are all things we have to think about.
It's about making sure that technology is used to help people and make healthcare more accessible, not to create new ways to exclude or discriminate against people.
Exactly. Technology should help to create a more equitable and just healthcare system for everyone, not make the gap between the haves and have-nots even bigger.
It also comes back to that issue of power. Who controls the data? Who designs the algorithms? Who ends up benefiting the most from these advances?
We should always be asking those questions. We can't let just a few tech companies or wealthy nations control the future of global health. It has to benefit all of humanity.
Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to bring it back to our listeners. We've talked about a lot today, from potential reforms of the WHO to the role of technology. What are your thoughts on this conversation? What really stood out to you?
Well, we discussed the pandemic treaty and the concerns about national sovereignty, the influence of private money on the WHO, the importance of transparency and being accountable, and the need to think about global health in a way that's more just and fair.
At the end of the day, it's about the future we want to create. What role do you see global organizations playing in creating health policies that affect us all? What are your hopes and your concerns?
I think this conversation has really shown us how complicated all these issues are. There are no easy solutions. But these types of discussions help us start to deal with the challenges and find a way forward.
It's about moving past fear and disagreements, and instead focusing on a vision of working together globally, a vision where we all work together to create a world where everyone has a chance to be healthy, no matter where they live or what kind of resources they have.
And that starts with all of us. We have to stay informed, keep talking about these things, hold our leaders responsible, and speak up for the kind of future we want.
I couldn't agree more. Thanks to everyone for joining us for this deep dive into the future of global health. We hope it gave you something to think about and maybe inspired you to stay engaged in this really important conversation. Until next time.